Welcome to the October 19th, 2022 meeting of the Finance Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee. Without further ado, we will go straight into the agenda. The first item is approval of the minutes of September 28th, 2022. I'm going to make a motion for those. Can I get a second? Thank you, Suzanne. Any discussion or comments on the minutes? Any questions? Okay, Andy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Thank you. Next item up is acceptance of grants and gifts. And let me pull up the documents so I can talk through them. So we actually, following our last meeting where we had extensive discussion of grants and gifts, Donna and I met and talked about grants and gifts and have made some changes to the cover pages and some of the backup documentation. So I'm going to start with gifts. And I'm not going to pull up the documents on the screen unless anyone would want me to, but I just want to highlight a couple of the differences, which is one is there's more information about the purpose of the gifts now on the cover page. So you can see we have two gifts, one from the Heath School PTO and one from the Coolidge Corner School, or it should be Ruffin Ridley School PTO. And that's wonderful. And we thank both of them for the gifts, and you can see the purpose of them. So one was for folders and one was for to host Live at the Hive, which is summer programming. So I think we vote on these separately, right? I'm having a moment. Yes. So can I get a motion for the gifts? Thank you, Nancy. Andy, I'm assuming I can make you a second. Okay, Suzanne, how do you vote?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I vote yes. And I'm going to come back to, actually, let me talk about it right now. So the other thing that we had talked about last time, I'm changing up the agenda a tiny bit, bear with me, Donna. We had talked about what the process was once a gift was accepted. And so now Robin is going to be writing the letters. And they have now some of the tax information. And I'm just going to pull up an example of a letter really quickly so that people can see what that looks like. Using a letter that I received back in the day from when I was the treasurer of the PTO from David Pollock. So this was the letter that was the thank you letter, but it didn't have the tax information. And so we're going to include now basically the date, the description, and whether or not there was any goods or services received. And so, and then David Perlman now will sign these in the same way he signs other letters when he comes to Robin. And so that way people will get a nice thank you note, and then they will also get the tax record at the same time, or I'll say the record of the donation. And that way the sort of the loop is closed where it might have not been completely closed for in the recent past. Any questions on any of that? Yeah, Suzanne.
Well, I think I've gotten letters not from here, but in general, often it just says check with your, tax accountant to see if it might be deductible. Just to.
Yep.
I assume that last line was okayed by somebody, but.
The last line is actually the line that came from, it's what's on the town site for donations to Brookline Adult Ed. So it's the exact same language that's already been approved by the finance department.
Okay, fine.
And Robin's just double checking with, help me, Robin, Devin, just to, we're going to validate the letter against what the town sends out for gifts, just to make sure that we're consistent as well. But that will close that practice.
Great.
Yep. So grants. Let me pull up that document. So there is one grant that we are being requested to approve, which is Perkins grant. And this is for career and technical education. That material was also provided to us along with the budget, and it's for just over $50,000. Does anyone have any questions on the material relating to that grant? It's for a lot of professional development for the existing staff, basically, summer workshops and other activities. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the grant? Thank you, Suzanne. Nancy, can I take your hand as a second? Okay, Andy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda was the update on grants and gifts procedures. And the only other thing I want to mention on that is just relating to the grants. Donna and I also did a little bit of work on the cover page for grants. And for the grants which don't have all the extra documentation, there'll be more information on the cover page. But essentially, we're just going to have a little bit better of a summary of the intent of the grant going forward so that we have that information and not just the budget expenditures. So next item up on the agenda is the FY22 close report. I'm going to pull this up. Super excited about it. Once I find it. There we go. So I was thinking back, and as far as I know, I don't think we've gotten I haven't gotten a fiscal year close report since I've been on school committee in 2.5 years due to staff transitions. So I want to say, and so this was prepared by Ruth Burdell, who's the consultant right now, who's supporting the A&F budget process. I'm going to make this a little bigger. And it was a really great format, I thought, but I also want to talk through this. I think there's 2 opportunities here. One is for people to look at the information that's here. We're not going to go through it cell by cell, but we can talk about the overall structure and people can ask questions. But also I would like us to think about, does this format work as a format that we all appreciate so that we can think about it as a format to ask on an annual basis going forward. So I'm going to talk about it and scroll through it, and I want people to interrupt as they go if they have questions or comments or anything they want to say. So first off, I just want to give a big picture. The first page is the school committee operating budget. This is the town funds that the school committee, that the public schools of Brookline receives. So you can see this is first page. Second page, let me change the way this scrolls. Second page is all of the grants that PSB receives or received in this past year, and we'll talk more about what each row looks like, but I just want to explain. First page was town funds, second page was grants, and then grants continued onto this page, and then this section is revolving funds, along with gift and fees, and that continues as well. And then there is an all funds section here at the very end. So this is this is a comprehensive view of all of the funds that were expended. And you can see that there is about almost $139 million here, whereas this amount is 121. So there's a significant additional operation that goes outside of the town balance. Go ahead, Nancy.
Have we gotten this in the past, or is this the first time it's ever been in this simplified, fantastic, wonderful format?
So we've never gotten it that I can think of. So
this is awesome.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And one of the comments that we made for last year's budget book, which will be rectified for this year, was that the last year's budget book was not an all funds budget book. It was principally the town funds. But as you can see, there's almost $20 million of other grants and other funds that are supporting the PSB enterprise. And it's valuable to be able to see those funds as well and talk about what the impact of those funds are as well. So that's the structure. You can see again, there's the town funds, the grants, then the revolvers and gifts, and then the total. I just want to now spend a little bit of time here and just highlight that the FY22 ended up at a 0 balance and fully expended. And you can just see, and it's worth reflecting, the balance of personnel versus non-personnel expenses. And that there's still some encumbered lines in here, and that has to do with expenses that are haven't necessarily been billed but are expected to be billed. Does anyone have any question on this page before I go on to the next page, which I think has a lot more content on it? This is the largest part of the budget, but it's a little more cut and dried.
Right, could you just kind of go over that last remaining balance? We have the 430.
This is basically, it says that the personnel was over, we had a budget and we expended more of the budget. We spent about 430,000 more of the budget on personnel than we anticipated, and 430,000 less on salary than we anticipated. But at the end of the day, it zeroed out.
On non-salary.
No, we spent less. There was 430,000 less than we anticipated spent on non-salary.
Right. Okay.
430,000 more, but it zeroed out.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. And part of that was that, and we'll get to this in a minute, part of that was that there were originally expenses that were expected to be required to charge to ESSER, but because, and you'll see this discussion in a moment, because the we were able to bring more of ESSER forward, and that meant we had basically less expenses, and so we're able to bring more of ESSER forward, and some of those charges were brought here. And so when they were brought here, it's slightly out of balance, but it's fine. Again, it zeroes out here. I'm going to go on to the next page. Nancy, is that an old hand or a new hand?
Sorry, it's an old hand.
Okay, Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a new hand. If there were like a non-zero balance at the end of the year just for the operating part alone, what would happen to that money, or where would it? Or is it almost by definition the case that we would never have anything but a zero in that?
If you had a balance, then that would basically be captured as free cash and go into the free cash system.
I see. And has it ever happened that we left a non-zero balance in there at the end of the year, or
I would imagine
is money always shifted around so that this zeroes out?
I would imagine that there have been years where there's been a non-zero balance, but I can't tell you because I've never seen a report like this. So I don't know. I don't know that anyone here has been around long enough to know if there's been a non-zero balance. Continuing on. So this is broke down by federal and state, as you can see. And I'm going to walk you through. So this was the balance you can see at the beginning of FY21 for each one of these. Then you can see how much we received in FY22. And those two sum into the available funds for that year. Then you can see how much was expended and how much is still expected to be expended through an encumbrance. And so basically row ones or column 1 and 2 equals column 3. Column 3 minus 4 and 5 equals column 6. So you can see where this column ends at in that amount. Now, I want to highlight one other thing. Some of these funds, because of the way the federal government and the state government works, and this is just an accounting thing, some of them basically you spend money before you get it. And so it's almost like you have a credit line with them. And so even if you don't have the money actually technically in your fund, it doesn't mean that it's not out there. So for ESSER, we technically right now in our accounting system have $611,000 in ESSER still outstanding. However, if you actually look at, this is what I would call the credit line. There's another $2 million in credit. And so that's where the 2.6 million that we will be talking about for ESSER comes from, that was carried over from the previous years. So it's important to understand that there's, just because there's an end balance here doesn't mean that that's all the money that we have been authorized to spend. So you can see, oops, I managed to scroll backwards. You can see the different kinds of grants that are here. A lot of these we've talked about in the past as being entitlement grants. There's early childhood, last year's version of Perkins, which was the grant we just approved a moment ago. And we've approved almost all of these already, I think, for the current fiscal year. So you can see where things are at. One other thing I want to highlight here is that you can see that the federal and state grants shown here are restricted funds. And so it's not just like if we have a gap somewhere else, we can just use this money. They're designated for specific purposes, and they're typically allocated fully to those specific purposes. So it's important for people to understand that as well. While there may be a balance, it may not be quote unquote widely accessible for every purpose, unlike the ESSER grant, which is much more unrestricted, is essentially unrestricted. I'm going to keep going, and you can see here's the private grants as well. So you can see, again, there's funds available here. And some of these, again, are very small. So that's helpful understanding. Any questions on grants before I keep going? Oh, Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, Mariah, I'm a little lost because you're going to guide me, so that's great.
Yep.
So that ending fund balance for FY22, is that column the same as that first column for 21? Is that the fund balance is the fund balance? I mean, the different years.
It's like a point in time moment. This was how much was in that account on June 30th, 2021. And this one is how much is in it on June 30th, 2022.
So I'm confused by the revenue receivables. What are those?
So imagine, so revenue receivable is like your credit line with the federal government that says, oh, you know, we've only given you $600,000 so far, but you also can still request another $2 million. It has to do with how you submit for the money. And basically you have to, you decide how you're going to spend it, put in a request, they fund it, then they give you the money. That's one way of doing it. Or you spend the money and then they reimburse you. And I'll show you, for example, like Metco is negative here because we've already spent the money and it hasn't come back in. You can see that there's still pending money there. So it depends how it's set up.
And so going back up to ESSER, we've got the end funding balance, and then we have the credit, as you say, and so funds available is that next number. Those two columns go to that next column.
Exactly. So this one plus this one equals what we actually have access to for future years. Yep.
And then so Title I, let's just do that one.
Okay.
So we've got the end balance, we've got our credit, but then because it's restricted, we don't get to what? We don't get to get that money. We don't
just, you shouldn't think about it. You shouldn't think about it as fully accessible. You're right that we might want to actually list an amount here, but it's important for everyone. It's not fungible in the same way that the ESSER money is fungible. So that's the important thing to think about. I kind of agree with you that I would like to maybe have it listed here, but with this restricted funds or explanation, so that people don't think about it like, oh, just go address this.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Sorry to slow you
sure.
down.
No. It's really interesting too, and it's a helpful presentation, and it's helpful to think about how we can improve it. So I'm going to go on to revolvers. So this is pretty interesting too. Remember last year, I want to focus on the first three here in particular. So if you recall, all of these were in really rough shape. I'll just give a little bit of a history of food services. I think that people had said that like food services until COVID had never ended up positive, if I'm recalling correctly. And every single year, and we talked about this, and for those of you who are, at least Cliff, I think you might be the only one in advisory who's been around, but right, like the saga of food service, I think you probably knew about. When I was on advisory, we talked about food service deficits. So this year, I just we'll go through quickly. They started the year with 200,000 in part because there was this federal funding for food. They actually broke $4 million in revenue, which I think the highest they'd ever been before was like $2.5 million in revenue. And so they ended the year with a fund balance of just over $1 million. So that they started the year at 205, ended at $1 million. Beep started the year at 188, ended the year at 1.5 million. Some of this might be related for Beep due to tuition timing of acceptance of tuition and not necessarily expending it yet. But that's good news that they're at least in a stronger position than they were. And Base, if everyone recalls, was essentially we had to put in money last year. They were still at a slightly positive amount, and Michelle came to present to us not too long ago. She's actually presented several times this year, but they ended the year with a positive fund balance as well. So that is good news for the revolvers. It's helpful for at least me to see where all these revolvers are at, and in terms of, are they getting a healthy fund balance? Are they staying stable? The next thing that we've talked about is, and it's not here yet, but it will be something, is, for example, is there a maximum fund balance we want? Is there a minimum fund balance we want? What is the range of healthy fund balance that we're aiming for in many of these? And we don't have that yet, but that's something I'd like to see. Cliff, go ahead.
Thanks. Just a question on the revolvers. Was any of the revenue that we're seeing a result of federal or state funds that we are not going to see in the future?
The only one that I know of, and Linus, step in when you if you hear if you know something different, and I don't know that we're not going to hear it going forwards, is food services, because as far as I know, the federal government stopped picking it up, but the state has now funded free lunch, and I think that might be. I didn't get the sense that that was intended to be a stopgap or a short-term provision. So we don't know, but the funding of lunch, fully funding of lunch, is the big area of this.
And I haven't heard anything differently from that.
Okay. Any more questions, Cliff, or just that one?
Not at the moment.
Okay, go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to talk about that universal lunch, and that's why we're probably in such good shape. But as you said, the state's picking it up at least for another year. I don't know for how long. I was just curious, I mean, not to be nitpicky, was that a gift that we gave Base, or was that a loan?
Well, there is no gift or loan because it's our money, right?
Yeah.
It's our putting it from our one pocket to the other pocket. But I don't think that they were expected to, quote unquote, give it back. And they only ended up the year $33,000 positive. So it is what it is. But the good thing about the revolvers, just to talk a little bit about this, is that it allows some of the expenses, for example, for custodial, to be shifted over. So, and other things that are being carried. So it will allow for some flexibility, assuming these fund balances remain healthy. Go ahead, Helen.
So just for historical knowledge, Base in the past, when it was running flush, and it used to have $1 million or more even fund balance, would help to pay for custodians, would sometimes buy computer for the school. So they have in the past, I wouldn't ask them to do it now, but just to know this, that in the past, it's not our money. We can't spend that money, I don't think, in their fund balance. Their board and they can decide to give us some, but my understanding is it's not the school department's money. They are under the school department, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that, well, their board is not has no legal standing. Their board is an advisory board only. And they are part of PSB. But I think, and again, Linus, you should correct me if you understand differently, that essentially they contribute to the extent that they are using the facilities, right? So again, custodial and other things that they are using is the reasonable way to think about this. But no, we understand that what happened a couple of years ago with the transfer of funds to cover an operating budget gap is not.
No, I'm not talking about that.
I'm just right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But like in general, they would use things that that contribute to their mission could be funded through that revolving fund.
Right.
Linus, anything different on that you understand?
No, but what I did was capture the note to make sure we flesh it out more deeply.
Okay. And you can see there's more gift accounts here. And what else? So that you can, again, just concluding, you can see that there's the all funds budget here of just under $139 million. Helen, is that an old hand or a new hand?
Old.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Any questions on FY22 recap? Andy?
Is something like this going to be incorporated in the budget book this year that the public sees?
I think it would be a great thing to be able to offer this kind of thing going backwards. Ideally, we're going to have a a standard, like the same sort of chart of accounts that we present at every meeting and every quarterly report would tie to our annual budget book so that we have consistency and people can track these numbers. So that's hopefully something we're going towards. Because I think that, like, for example, the school committee page is awfully spare right now. And so what is the chart of accounts that appears here in addition to the grants?
Yeah, I'm thinking more of the annotated list of grants and revolving funds, which, you know, for public consumption would need quite a bit of annotation. Nobody would know what ESSER is, or, you know, what revolving funds even are in principle, much less what each of the ones do.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I think it's valuable to have this information, and even if the budget book this year doesn't have all of the information, that we can work towards, again, providing this information in the same way that we want to have a CIP section in the budget book as well.
Mhm.
These are things we'll iterate on.
Okay.
Other questions or comments on this one?
So I'll keep closing my screen. Is there any additional feedback on the form itself?
I was just wondering, does this form go to the state when we do our end of the fiscal year reporting?
The actual end of year, yes, but I'd have to see how it compares to this, but this information is what goes to the state in that report.
But probably not this format. It's like
Not this
different.
form, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
They have their own, I'm sure. the state.
Yeah.
I would just say, people have already kind of alluded to this, but those last two columns on the revenue side up top, where the restricted and unrestricted kind of get mixed, it shouldn't be too hard to add like a second or another column in there that basically separates out restricted and then, you know, kind of adds things over, because right now there are totals that you know, just don't seem to quite add up, and trying to give that detail to people, I think, would be a helpful thing.
Okay.
Was ESSER the only unrestricted? Yeah, so once that is over, that whole category will probably disappear.
What about the circuit breaker? It suggests the circuit breaker.
You're right. Circuit breaker is too.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's a couple other ones I think that are, oh no, just those two. Yep. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to Ruth for preparing that. Next item on the agenda is FY23 first quarter discussion. I'm going to pull up the memo and the table. If the computer allows me to. Okay. Oh, sort of. Okay, so this is the memo about the first quarter report, and we'll get to the table in 1 second. I just want to highlight a couple of things. First, Ruth notes that more ESSER was able to be carried forward than as we discussed already. And the Office of Student Services has, as always, provided a report on out-of-district tuition. And it looks like there is a surplus currently that's being projected. So that is helpful in terms of balancing the budget. And that she'll provide some additional information on the grant and revolving funds. And then she just went through the categories that are here, so everyone knows what's in them. So here's the report right now. You can see that basically there's the original budget, how much has been spent to date, how much is encumbered, the balance, and then what the projected expenditures are for the rest of the year. And whether or not there's a projected surplus or deficit. So you can see that right now personnel is basically tracking at 0, which makes sense. Go ahead, Cliff, sorry.
I was raising my hand just to be up there for when you
Oh,
finished.
you wanted to
I
be
almost thought-
first, okay.
I had a thought in my head, so I wanted to make sure I kept it by.
Got it,
So
okay.
that's all.
So if we just run through the lines, you can see that essentially everything's tracking at breaking even except for outside services and contracts, which, as you heard a moment ago, there's about 880,000 that is the tuition account is running below that, and that goes in that line. And then it looks like there's $50,000 that's been shifted from circuit breaker to that same line. So essentially, that's where the $880,000 that you can see get down here in grand total is exactly what we heard about a moment ago about tuition. So, any questions on this other than Cliff from the committee? And then we'll go to Cliff. Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to check. So the surplus is on outside placement, so not as many students are placed out of the district. Is that where she's getting this money?
Linus, do you know if it relates to the number of students or if it's something else?
So we'll hear more about this when Lisa comes to present an update on special education and student services. I think we're going to try to aim for the November 21st meeting. But right now, there were a number of students that graduated from the system or exited the system. And then we're also looking at opportunities to return students back to the system as well. So, but I want her to share more of the more intimate details around that, but that's some aspects of it as well. And when we get to, so don't get overly excited about the numbers right now, because you're going to hear when we get to the guidelines and driver's document that there is a 14% increase that we're going to be seeing in related special education related services. So and we're projected right now that number is going to hit us to the tune of about 1.2 million. So don't get overly, I mean, it's great to see it here, but there are going to be some additional changes that come with that as well.
Are you saying, Linus, that part of that additional expense for special education is related to bringing these students back from out of district?
Ask me that question again.
Are you saying that some sizable part of that extra 1.2 million, was it, in
No.
special education spending is due to?
No.
Okay,
no.
so I misunderstood.
Yeah. So what I was saying with that part is that there's a new service fee. There's a new charge that districts are being hit with a 14 to the tune of 14%.
Oh.
And so that 14% of our circuit breaker hits us at about 1.2 million. Okay. So that's going to be an added cost, but we'll get more in detail with that when we get to the drivers. But I wanted to contextualize this surplus right now, the 880 against that 1.2 million.
It's 14% of out of district tuition, not circuit breaker, just to make sure.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's okay. Yeah, Helen, and then we'll call on you, Cliff.
Just to clarify, remember that private placements can have a certain amount of increase in terms of inflation every year, but in addition, they can apply for a reorganization type thing where they can add, in the middle of the year, ask the state for approval to increase their tuitions. And we are left holding the bag, even if it's in the middle of the year and we haven't planned for it. It's something we've been working on with our legislators to make it so that it's not retroactive, but it begins in September so we can plan for those kinds of increases. But this is something that I wouldn't spend that money in any way at this point, because it's certainly gonna, they're gonna say inflation is killing them and they need to raise their tuitions.
Cliff, see what happens when you raise your hand early? I call on you
Yeah,
last.
exactly. Well, so I'm the question I have is kind of a bean counter question, and I'm sure that others, certainly an advisory committee, might look at this report and have the same sort of question I'm going to ask, which is that from a management view, a lot of folks would be expecting to see something that says, okay, we've just had 3 months pass. This is what we anticipated the quarterly budget for expenses and revenues to be for this quarter. Here's what we actually incurred. As versus what we have here is the annual sums.
I
And next
know.
to that, yeah, so
Can I
I'm
cut you
just going
off
to,
and can I cut you
please,
off?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Yes, I completely agree. And while we are not in a place to get that kind of report yet, what I can say is that the bulk of the budget is a very even expense over the year, right? Like it's projected because once you hire a staff, you know when their payroll is going out. One of the things that we learned last year was about thinking about how the budget is really front loaded for a lot of these other expenses, and you can somewhat see that, but we don't have these percentages necessarily drafted out, and I would like to see that too. It's been something that I've been hoping to see, if not monthly, then quarterly, to be able to understand how we expect expenses, like whether or not we're tracking against what we expected to happen. So I agree.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Suzanne.
Yeah, so I don't even know this. Our staff certainly our teachers, are they paid year round or are they paid, do you know if they're paid 22 or 26?
They're paid 10 months, I think, right, Linus?
Yes, it's 10.
So our first quarter would be lower than the rest of the year because they're not teaching much except in September.
They're teaching the September month, right? But my point is that basically once it's going, you know exactly that, like the annual amount is basically, it churns along once it starts at a very even pace. Whereas, for example, materials and supplies or some other things, you might, like, for example, outside, you might sign a contract for the year and that's paid for in August for an entire year contract, right? Or the materials for a class, you might buy everything in August to have for the entire year. And so some of the costs are expected to be expended almost fully by December, whereas other ones are evenly spread. But this is something we've been very interested in and haven't gotten yet.
Yeah, because you can't really, I guess, thinking about that, you can't really just say a fourth of each of those budget items should have been spent by now, because as you said, some are upfront, some are, it's only a month into the salaries, you know, we have another 9 months to go. So anyway, it's just, it makes it a little hard to know if we're on target or not, what Cliff was saying and what you also agreed.
Yeah. Other comments on this one? Questions? Okay, I will stop sharing. And next item up is the preliminary enrollment discussion with Megan.
Well, thanks for inviting me to come chat with you all. I'm Megan. I'm the coordinator of registration and enrollment for those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to present to in this context before. I'm going to share my screen. We'll go through some information together. There we go. Okay, so is everybody seeing the slideshow? Stupendous. So this evening, we're just going to chat a little bit about the preliminary numbers we have for October 1st enrollment. This is not official numbers. We are still working on that. We'll talk about that. We'll sort of review where our projections that we talked about last March were versus where we seem to be right now. Look a little bit about, you know, where people have been coming and going from the end of the school year to now. So those who have left PSB, where they've gone, how many folks have come in that period. And then we'll sort of look at the trajectory of our year of graduation cohorts over the last few years so we can sort of see how we're doing and how those groups of children are moving through the system as a helpful tool, I hope. So in big bold letters, these numbers that we are talking about this evening are not finalized. They are not certified by DESE. That will not happen until November 4th. That's DESE's timeline. So we can't give you certified numbers until then. They will not do it. So the numbers we have today are those that are as of October 19th, as of today. We anticipate they should be pretty close, but there could be some fluctuations with different things. So bear that with a grain of salt, okay?
Megan, before you go on, can you take a moment to explain what it means to be certified?
It means that there are no errors and that every student who we are counting is considered a Brookline student, but they haven't maybe graduated or attending another district or receiving services in a different way. So there's just a lot of fun and games that our Aspen team and our data team gets to play to make sure that we get down to 0 errors with the state and got all those numbers locked down for them. So we should be pretty close, like I said, but no guarantees it's going to be perfect. So with that being said, when we do get that number from DESE saying, yep, everything looks great on November 4th, at that point, we will prepare that standard sort of section chart that we produce for you guys annually, showing the trajectory of the last few years, breaking it down section by section, school by school. So that will be sometime in November, and I'm sure we'll come back and do this in a larger audience in November when we have those fuller numbers, and of course incorporating some of the questions that you all will bring to us this evening and helping us refine that information for everybody as well. And I will just make one quick note while I have the chance to kind of put the plug in for it. The chart that you all get, that number is often a little bit higher than the formal number that we report to DESE. And that's because of our BEEP students. They only certify students who are aged 3 years old as of the date that we are sending it for October 1. So sometimes we have our little preschool students are a little under 3 at the beginning of the school year, and so they don't get counted. This chart that we share with you all, because it's important to know how many students we have really in our classrooms and what that program looks like, they are included. That's just the historical model of this. So there's always sort of like 2 different numbers that we're working with that serve slightly different purposes. You know that that's what's coming soon. All right, so these are this is our enrollment over time. Since 15-16, you can see this trajectory where we were building to our peak in the 1920 school year at our fun 7777 number. Us in the enrollment office will never forget that number because it's very easy. And then COVID happened. So our numbers, as did all public districts and just schools in general across the country and the world, went down. So we are now seeing our number at 7,062 as of this October 1st, 2022, unofficially. Could go up or down by a few. But overall, that is a sustained increase from our initial dip in 2020-21. Last year, we went up a little bit, and we're continuing to progress forward in a positive trend. As far as the distribution, everybody's favorite, of course, is how many kindergartners did we get this year? That's a good benchmark, I think, for a lot of folks. We have 509 kindergartners, which is more than last year. You'll be able to see that that number over the years as well later in the presentation. Our pre-K to 8 number is 4,974, and our BHS number at the moment for grades 9 through 12 with our special program students is at 2,088 at the moment. And so in talking about sort of where we are in the projections, where, that we were talking about last March, or that Erin Cooley presented in March to the committee. This slide is a representation from that presentation. I've linked for you the school committee docket that includes that full presentation if you wanted to refer back to it. But before I show you and talk to you about the different plus points, I wanted to make sure that we were really talking about what those projections were based on. So in the preparation for the FY23 budget, we sort of pulled 3 different numbers. We wanted to have a range. I think that it was referred to as the cone of uncertainty in that presentation and in that conversation, because things were so wildly volatile still, coming out of being our first year back in full person and all of that, and seeing what would happen. So the low number that you're going to see represented was based on our single point projection. This is the numbers that we've used historically over many years. And it's based on a 5-year average. We did exclude that 2020-21 school year as an outlier because it really just screwed with the statistics of it. When we pulled it out, everything readjusted. And it does, in fact, include the new housing developments that were anticipated to be occupied during the FY23 year that we got from the planning department. So that includes 134 Babcock, 21 Crown and Shield, and the Hancock Village developments. So that projection, that low projection, includes those developments. Okay. It assumes BEEP enrollment at 300 students. I don't know how, why, or where that number came from, but that is the presumption that was used in these projections for budgeting purposes. So we're just going to go with it. And it also assumes special programs enrollment at 24 students. The mid number was an average of 3 different enrollment indicators sort of added on top of that low indicator. So that was really looking at our the withdrawal of newcomer students in 2020. So that's our immigrant population, students who this is their first time attending school in the US. That sort of specialized population of newcomers. So how many of them withdrew during 2020? It accounts for the decrease in our English language learner population between 2019 and 2021. And then it also took into account sort of the new registrations of newcomer students again, starting in January 21 through March of 22. So that average is then added on top of that mid-range. These are not my numbers, but I just want to make sure that we're understanding what it is. And that high number is that Cropper-McGibbon forecast that we completed with the Cropper-McGibbon group back in, I think it was 2019, maybe. And those are numbers that were done before COVID and assumed no changes to the world or the situation of enrollment. So those numbers are quite high, given what has happened in the world since that time. Okay. So
Carolyn has her hands up. Carolyn, can the question wait until the end, or is it like specific to clarify, or is it a question, a bigger question?
It's specific to the slide
sure,
that is up. Is okay with you, Megan?
Yep, go right ahead. I'll do my best.
Okay. I mean the timing. So I hear you saying that you're taking this from previous work, but still it's here. I live in the Hancock Village neighborhood. This is an area of, I would say, expertise for me. I'm extremely familiar with the project, with the scope and scale, the numbers. So when you say here, includes new housing developments to be occupied FY23 Hancock Village, what exactly does that mean?
So that means that we received information from the town planning department regarding the units that were anticipated to come online for the fiscal year 23, which is obviously not the entirety of the project. It's coming out, in phases. And there is a standard statistical model that has been used, and we did bear out actually last year with some testing in other neighborhoods and other large projects that assigns, one bedroom produces this number many of students.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So that is what that includes. So when we
So
did the
when you,
projection, we accounted for those additional students that we would
so
anticipate.
you are standing by the projection that 461 new units at Hancock Village will produce 100 students?
So
And I'll also just say, and I'd be happy to talk about it with you offline or explain it to anybody, that model is completely faulty.
Can we keep going, Carolyn, and come back to this in
Sure.
the discussion
So I'm
piece?
just going to say that for the record, it's super faulty and those numbers are wrong.
Okay, let's keep going. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So as we're looking at the actual enrollments over the last few years, kind of you can see our trajectory and the projected enrollments that we had prepared, or not we, that the director of data presented to you in March was as we were preparing for the budget. We've got that on the right hand side, that low number, that's the single point projection using our typical projection model. That mid, adding on those extra students that we thought maybe might be returning to our community, that international newcomer population. And then that high number is way up there from the Proper McGibbon report. Okay, so right now we have exceeded the single point projection number, and that beep number I just have highlighted here in yellow as the box to show that we are at 257 and not 300. So that presumption of 300, again, not really quite sure who or how that number got landed on. It's definitely higher than actual for any of the previous 4 years. Accepting the weird COVID year where we had space limitations on how many students we could accept. 250 seems to be the typical. So if we were to adjust that number accordingly, we're doing fairly well, actually. Our K-8 projection, we are actually closer to the midpoint.
Megan, before you move to K-8, can you talk more about also the change in enrollment for preschool?
Yes, of course. So I do understand that as of this year, the requirements for eligibility for our preschool program at BEEP changed from 2.6 years at the beginning of the year to 2.9 years. So that did decrease the number of applicants who ended up being eligible to even be accepted to the program. So that is also a change, certainly in policy and practice, that may have had an effect on being able to get to 300. I think Helen has her hand up. I don't know if that's new or old.
It's a new hand. I think Carolyn's hand is an old hand. Helen, unless it's about a clarification,
It is.
but
It's
you don't need to
just clarification.
Okay, but you don't need to
So-
explain about why BEEP is the size it is.
No,
No,
what
okay.
I'm going to say is that BEEP is required to take any 3-year-old who turns 3 throughout the year and is on an IEP and take them into a class. So they have to keep certain spaces open for those kids who will turn 3 throughout this year, even until June. So
That is correct.
that was what I was going to explain.
Thank you, Helen. That is helpful because we can't fill to 300 for the beginning of the year. Certainly we need some space available for those.
Exactly. They have to leave a certain amount of spaces open.
Exactly. And then as I was saying, our K-8 grouping is now closer to that midline projection, quite close actually. Our 9th through 12th in special programs is trending closer to the single point projection model. So we're seeing that positive trend more strongly with our younger elementary aged students than we are in our older students, and then the BEEP program being sort of a different model of acceptance and enrollment entirely. But it is below that projected 300 for October. So there are two slides that I'm going to show successively. This slide is a representation of this time last year. So we don't really want to necessarily focus on this, but I wanted to provide you this information for your records, for your reference, so that you can compare between the 2 years to see a little bit more information. So ultimately, this is the students who left the public schools of Brookline during the summer period. So certainly we had students report that they were leaving before the end of the year of 21, or who reported after October or September of 21 as well. They're not included here. This is simply the folks who are reporting to us after the end of the school year and around the beginning of the school year. How many left? What grades were they in? What's that distribution like? And where did they go? I'll just point out that the overall total here was 503 students who left last year this time. And the bulk of those folks who left us went out of state, okay? But a fairly good size proportion also transferred to in-state private, with some big peaks in grades 6, 7, and 9. 9 not being a surprise, we often see lots of ninth graders leave our K-8 system and go to private school. We also see a lot of ninth graders come back during the spring from private school. And then this green column, second to last on the right, is the students that we registered over the summer, last summer. So we had a very busy summer last year with 588 new students during that summer period, from the close of school to the reporting date close of the end of September. So our net gain and loss, so we've lost a bunch of students and we've added a bunch of students. We gained overall 85 students through that process, bringing our trajectory up. And again, I will just note, this is simply during that summer period. We do a lot of work in the spring to register new students for the following year that are not accounted for here. So those overall October 1 numbers, tell the overall story, but this is a little snapshot, a little picture of where families are going and where they're coming. So now this slide is for the current year, okay?
Can I just ask one question, Megan, just to clarify? This is students, like when we have K students, what does that mean when K students they registered and then they decide to transfer somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it's not rising K students who are currently in. This is students who weren't in school, registered, and then out registered.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
So these are the on the left-hand column, it's their 22-23 grade level. Okay, so that's the grade that if they were with us currently, this is what grade they would be placed in. So the K students would be maybe beat students who had planned to come and then change their mind, that kind of thing. So you can see that the total of students that we lost overall here is 433. So that is less than we saw proportionally than last year. And the proportion of where students went overall has seen, you can see a pretty significant rebalancing here, with just about half being out of state and only 97 of those going to private school this time. And nobody in the 20s or 30s in terms of grade level distribution. Again, that's 6 and 8 are big pieces of folks transferring out. And those are very common years for folks to make that transition between public and private back and forth. As far as the new student enrollment, that was also a little bit lower than last year during the summer. And that's because of kindergarten, which I'm delighted by, to be perfectly frank, as the person who has to work with all of the families, or gets the opportunity to work with all of the families coming through. We saw fewer families making last minute decisions to register for kindergarten over the summer this year, which may mean our outreach was better in the spring, or that families were more secure in their decisions sooner to register for kindergarten in the public system. So I would say less volatility is the story here. We still see a net gain, not a loss, in those summer changes. but a bit less volatile and more stability in the trends. So this next slide is looking at the students who are new to us over the last few years, giving us where they're coming from as well. So not only where did the ones who were here go to, but where are the new students coming from? So you can see this is that same number as here, the 491 and the 588. That's what's represented in these two blocks here. This is that COVID year, and you can see that that number is very low. We brought in very few new students during that summer period. Saw a lot of losses, and that's obviously reflected in our overall numbers. So we have a few different categories of where folks will come from. We've got folks coming from international school. That's that blue block at the bottom. You can see proportionally last year, it was obviously significantly higher than the 2020-21 year. And then this year, it's even higher. Proportionally speaking, it's even, it's a much greater proportion of the new students that we worked with this summer. Just about half, to be honest. We had about 20 students last year return from homeschool programs back to the public school system. This year, we saw an additional 12 students come back from homeschooling. And then the rest of the folks are coming, the Massachusetts private school transitions are the yellow. So we saw more students come back a little bit from private school. And then the remainder of folks are coming from outside of Brookline. The orange block is our kindergarteners, for the most part, a couple of first graders who are new to school for the first time. So that orange block getting much smaller reflects that kindergarten outreach and or parental decision-making and confidence. And everybody else is coming from out of Brookline, but within a domestic context. And then the last little bit I wanted to show is this year of graduation cohort progression. So it's sort of like a little step ladder going from the bottom to the top, if you will. I looked at the folks over the last 6 years who are still with us. So our 12th graders, we can see what that cohort has been doing for the last 6 years, how it has been growing or contracting. So the white blocks at the bottom will show you the first year we've got representation for that year of graduation. So our kindergartners going across the bottom, and then first, second, third, and so forth. So you can see that there is, in the 2022-23, these blue blocks are representing an increase from the previous year. So we're not going to pin ourselves to the 17-18 number or that peak 7777 number that we had in 1920. It's just, where are we going from the year previous? Are we going up? Are we going down? Are we staying approximately the same? So obviously everybody decreased in that 2020-21, and then we started to see some sort of modest increases last year, and we're seeing far more cohorts that the cohort has grown, right? That same group of kids moving through is getting bigger. So the other thing that I thought was interesting is it does appear that there's a sort of like a natural progression where there are losses in the cohort year over year, because these were very busy years, and even then you can see that some of those cohorts will lose kids as time goes on, right? We start big in kindergarten, and folks maybe don't come back for 4th grade, things like that. So the contraction is natural. It's just a matter of what the proportion is. The only groups that have noticed, like our 11th graders went from 509 kids to 507 kids. That's not like a significant loss, if you will. 513 to 510, not significant. Our 6th grade lost quite a few students this year, which is interesting. I don't know why. I can't specifically pinpoint any particular reason. And our fourth grade saw a pretty good contraction as well from when they were in third grade. It's an interesting point, but overall, the point is that the trend is definitely our groups of children who are with us. It is going back to getting larger. So some little hot hits, some conclusions here. Our total enrollment overall is definitely higher than it was in 2021 at this time. Key point is that our projections do assume that bigger BEEP cohort than our actual enrollment for a variety of reasons, the preschool age restriction, as well as those seats that need to be held open. And as always in Brookline, our mobility and churn sort of remain those important data points. That's why we look at those withdrawal and new student additions. 488 kids, but we only gained 58 because that churn. But we did see that fewer number of students withdrawing over the summer period this year than last. And we had fewer students waiting to register for kindergarten during the summer. Either, again, due to that better outreach, more extensive outreach, and or parental confidence in their decision at an earlier time. And then a couple of positive observations and trends that we can point to here is that we definitely are seeing our international students. So those are students, I will just briefly at the last minute define for you what I mean by international students. That is a student whose last school of attendance was outside the US. So it has nothing to do with citizenship, nothing to do with native language supports or anything like that. Their most recent schooling experience was outside of the US or a domestic context. So we are seeing that group of students returning at a higher rate than last year. And most of our cohorts are seeing an increase in students compared to prior years. So we are building in a positive enrollment trend at this time. I'm sure folks maybe have some questions. Let's see if I can help with any of those, do my best.
Before we get to questions, Megan, thank you. Linus, do you want to add anything?
Sure thing, and I'll try not to lock my screen this time.
Let me, before you get going, I want to say that I want to leave 15 minutes for the discussion of the guidelines and calendar. So if we can keep the conversation at this part to 5 minutes or so, that'd be good. Thank you.
I will be brief. Thank you, Helen, I think, for making the comment about BEEP and how it grows over the course of the year. So one of the things that Megan and I have been talking about is actually studying Brookline's enrollment patterns over the course of the year. So there are significant points, as I think you're seeing here, where our enrollment goes up or goes down. And so what we're going to start tracking and try to get maybe a 4 or 5 year pattern of where are we in September, where are we in October, where are we in January, where are we in March, and where are we in June, so that we can see how we ebb and flow as our enrollment expands and contracts. And I think that will be helpful because when the new year rolls around, there's a new set of leases. And I think, again, a surprising point for me coming to Brookline, a system like Brookline, is the amount of churn that we actually have. Our churn rate is pretty high certainly for a district of our caliber. But we also need to make sure that we are thinking about the year in total versus sort of our points in time or our October 1 number. That's the first thing. And then the second part I want to pick up on is the conversation that we're having about Hancock Village. I had some conversations earlier today with the town planning department, and we are going to look more closely at what's happening in Hancock Village. We've made our projections, and Megan, I can't remember if you shared what we've seen thus far in terms of enrollment from Hancock Village, and certainly recognizing the year, we're still just have our toe in the water in terms of the year, the length of the year. But I just want to note that we will be having conversations about the impact that Hancock Village will have on the system.
And I can share that, Linus. Thank you for reminding me. So of the newly built units, at the moment we have 42 students represented in those that are open and available. And only 12 of those were new over the summer. So the remainder of those were students with us last spring, and or maybe moved within Hancock Village to a different unit or from another part of that same neighborhood typically. So that's where we're at currently with those units coming online. And they do continue to come online, you know, daily, weekly. So, you know, we're keeping our eyes on it as we go. But so far, our numbers at the Baker School are comfortable based on what we anticipated.
Sorry, I just want to clarify one question on this. So 12 students of the 42 were new to PSB.
They were new to PSB during the summer registration.
Meaning that they were enrolled last year. So, because we had talked about some of the units coming online for this year. Okay.
So some of them are new as of during the school year 21-22. Represents some of those 42. Some of them were current PSB students that just moved around within town. And then of the 42, 12 are brand new to Brookline for SY 22-23.
Okay.
So it's coming in smaller pieces. It's not a flood at once. I think it's the point I'm trying to make.
Linus, do you want to add anything to the Hancock Village part before I call on Carolyn?
And the other thing is that we have also, so for this school year, we also looked at Baker's staffing in anticipation for what may be a deluge that what we would anticipate at Baker. So we have added or allowed Baker to carry staffing to accommodate any enrollment shifts or those types of things. So we anticipated that, and we're continuing to work and work with the leadership at Baker, but have afforded them some added opportunities this year.
Thanks. Before I call on Carolyn, does anyone from the subcommittee or school committee have any questions? Thoughts?
No, other than to say that was great. Thank you so much. Answered a lot of questions for me. So thank you for putting that together. Thank you.
We'll do it all again in November with everybody.
Yay.
But with the additional breakdown by school too, that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I was going to ask, but you know, thank that's even better. Thank you so much for that.
Okay, Carolyn, go ahead, and then we'll conclude this bit and go on to the FY24.
I'll try to be quick. I am really interested in seeing the numbers by school. I'm wondering why those weren't part of this presentation, if you have them. I know Baker is at 675, and I think that's up from what, 650 or so, 25 last year. I'm glad to hear that staffing resources are good at Baker in anticipation of what will ultimately probably be a flood of students, not a trickle. As you said, Megan, the first of the big buildings is just leasing up now. So the 42 is from 48 units that were opened last year. The issue is going to be space and resources allocated to space. When you get into the 700s, it's not comfortable.
Thank you, Carolyn, for providing local expertise. Okay, so thank you again, Megan, and feel free to check out unless you want to stay. Okay, so next item on the agenda is the FY24 budget development calendar and priorities. I'm going to pull up Acrobat again. This is the calendar. The only update since the last time you all have seen it, the last meeting was we had, let me back up 1 second. There's only 4 dates that we vote for the calendar itself. The rest of this is just planning that I sort of keep track of so that everyone knows where we're at for the different meetings that we're going to have. The 4 dates that are relevant are these ones, and the one that didn't have a date before, but we now have a date, is January 13th for the budget book to be available. So budget book is available on the 13th. There'd be the presentation on the 19th. The presentation includes an initial public comment, and then the official hearing on the budget is February 2nd, and then we would vote on the 9th. So any questions on that, or can we go straight to the guidelines? Okay, I'm going to keep going. You all got last night a copy of version 2 of the budget guidelines from Linus. And the document reflects the comments. I hope most of the comments that were made last time, and I just want to talk through it pretty quickly. So the sort of the key things that we talked about, some of them were thinking of, we talked about revising some of the wording in here. Specifically, areas that we focused on were modifying the workforce around the modifying the wording around workforce in particular and around the budget in particular. I don't think the other three got drastically modified. Socio-emotional was modified to focus less on pandemic and to start to move towards a new normal. In this section, the examples as related to the budget, they were tuned to be very budget focused, the budget impacts of some of the activities going on. And then in addition, we had last year a separate budget drivers document, and David had suggested at our last meeting that it be included here. And so which was a great idea. And so the expense drivers are now reflected in this document. I'm just going to go through them at the high level, thinking about enrollment, which is a big one, contractual obligations, a big one, inflation, a big one, out of district expenses. I want to flag here the 14% that Linus mentioned earlier. This information has just come in from the Commonwealth earlier this month, about 2 weeks ago. Building maintenance, technology maintenance are the big drivers of costs in the budget, and then revenue. And there's some discussion of impacts on the town revenue, circuit breaker, and revolving funds. Some of the same discussion in revolving funds is what we talked about earlier in terms of the large revolvers being in a stronger position. And we just need to continue to monitor that and pay attention. And then of course, thinking about ESSER. So I don't want to necessarily go through the document. I just wanted to give the big headlines and then open up the floor for conversation. And I want to make one more comment, which is that the subcommittee, if it feels comfortable, can vote to advance these to the full committee for discussion or for a vote itself when we're ready. So, comments, questions? Suzanne, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again for putting the drivers in there. I think that really will help us focus on, what is important and what we need to be thinking about. So I think that's great. So thank you for that. Thank you, David, for the idea. Thank you, Mariah, for making it happen.
I'm going to hop on that bandwagon. This is awesome. This is terrific. Thank you so much for this. Was a ton of work. Thanks for all of it. It's great. It's such a what's the word? It really helps us with transparency, especially with the budget and where it's going. So I just want to say thanks for all the hard work.
David?
One potential suggestion as we gear up for town meeting, perhaps this could be included with our submission to town meeting so that we can inform our legislative body about how we come up with our budget and the different factors.
I would like to suggest that when school committee votes it, that you would actually send it over to town meeting, not just in the packet, but as a separate email. I think it's
Yes.
worth them seeing.
Be happy to do that.
Thanks. Other comments, Andy? You're good? Okay. Does the subcommittee want to take a vote on moving this ahead to full school committee for consideration? Okay, can I get a motion? Okay, go ahead, Nancy. Second? Thanks, Andy. Actually, before we take the vote, I just want to ask our advisory committee colleagues if they have anything that they want to mention to us before we take the vote. Did you like it? Did you read it?
Hey, Mariah, it's Ben.
Hi, Ben.
I am rather unshaven, so I had my camera up, but I don't think anybody will be offended on this committee. I thought this was excellent, by the way, and it's going to raise a lot of detailed questions, of course, that either you don't have the answers to at the moment, or they're going to be forthcoming as time goes on. And so I think if my advice as a retired PR guy is to wait for the right moment when you have answers to these questions and people are not frustrated by saying, well, what do you mean by this, that, and the other thing, particularly in terms of dollars. But I thought it's an excellent document. So
Thanks.
Thank you, Linus, and all those who worked with you on it.
Carolyn and then Cliff.
Thanks. I didn't raise my hand initially because I figured I've already said enough. I have a few quick questions about it. The guidelines, so page 2, where it says the guidelines that will inform our work. Just wondering if these are listed in a priority order or just general.
No.
Okay, thank you. The out of district, and I don't know if it's too soon to be asking these kinds of questions, transition identified students out of district into appropriate in-district programs. So are we ultimately going to see some numbers associated with that? I mean, I sort of remember a similar conversation under Dr. Lupini of basically trying to reduce out of district costs. So, and I would assume that would be associated with increased spending in buildings to serve those students. But generally, are we going to, like, at what point do we see numbers that flesh out more what that goal is all about?
Linus, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, so in November, our Department of Student Services will be bringing information forward to the committee. So I think the 10th docket is filling up. So more than likely it would be the 21st, I think. But we're aiming for November.
Thanks.
Okay. And sorry, I do have one other question.
Go for it.
That's sort of similar. I'm interested, I've followed a little bit about the conversation of, at least at BHS, equitable access to higher level courses, and I see a similar adjacent bullet point, equitable access to rigorous grade level general education curriculum. So I guess I'm curious to see how that plays out as a budget item. Will we be hearing much more about that?
Linus?
Yeah, actually, curriculum discussed this last night. So this is an ongoing project. And I think one of the reasons that we voted, the committee voted a 5-year guidelines is that it's superficial to think that these things will be completed in a single year. So these are multiple year initiatives and investments, and each year there will be a next iteration of those bodies of work. So that's why you'll see them similar from year to year for a period of time.
One of the
Thanks.
things that I've asked just on this point, and specifically on that bullet, is to get a little bit more detail, not necessarily for this year, but like it's helpful to know the work that's happening in that single year and be a little more specific on some of them. So I agree with that. Catherine and then Cliff, and then we've got 3 minutes. So, because I promised we'd end on time, I don't want to embarrass myself more than I already have. Go ahead, Catherine.
So first, this came a long way from last month, and that was nice to see. I'm wondering if this is this what we're gonna see every month? Is this just gonna get bigger and bigger until January?
I think that this is going to be a static situation because hopefully we're going to vote for it after this, and then it'll go to full school committee for a vote. So this will be it.
I was really glad to see that you were able to commit to that January date. That was kind of impressive too. And then I just have one question of curiosity mostly is how are you seeing costs in terms of inflation? And do you even know?
Linus, do we have an answer to that, or should we park that one for next month?
I think we should park that one because that's a number that we're watching very closely, but it will hit us definitely.
Okay.
That's
Cliff.
everything. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say that I did read this and I thought it was great. I think, obviously it provides a roadmap and there's going to be a lot of work ahead and a lot of details and a lot of questions, but tonight is not the time really to get into those things. But I really appreciate it because I think it gives all of us a good framework as to what we're going to be looking at and how you're going to approach things, and that gives us a roadmap for how we should be doing our work. So thank you.
Thanks. Okay. With all that positive feedback, let's take a vote. Nancy?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
And I vote yes too. And I should have clarified, I'm hoping we're going to advance both the calendar and the guidelines. Does that work for the four of you? Okay.
Yes.
That was one vote to advance both. Okay. Great. Well, it's 6:29. If we are done, then we can end a minute early. Okay. Thanks, everybody. This was great. Linus, our appreciation to you, Donna, and
Yeah.
to you, Robin, and thank you to Megan as well.
Thank you and thank the team. Outstanding work.
Great stuff. Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Right.